right, let's journey back in time. We're heading to the year 1795 to a little cottage in Wiltshire, England. But we're not going to look at this world through the eyes of kings or generals. Instead, we're going to see it all through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl named Ann Marshman, as she lives through a year that will change her entire life. So, picture this. It's a cold, windy March day in the village of Hilperton. Anne is standing in a churchyard, probably clutching her father's coat. And those bells you hear, they're tolling for her mother, Anne, who's just been laid to rest. This single moment, right here, is the pivot on which her entire world is about to turn. Because with her mother gone, Anne's childhood as she knew it is pretty much over. She's suddenly caught between the life she remembers and a whole new set of harsh responsibilities in a world that's lost its heart. And that transformation, well, that's the story we're diving into today. Okay, let's step inside the Marshman cottage. This is home to Anne, her father John, who's a weaver, and her brothers and sisters. Now, the same number of people live here as before, but the source describes it as feeling suddenly, painfully empty. The whole dynamic of the family has been completely upended. And this table, it really lays out the new reality in black and white. Everyone's burden just got heavier. The older sisters, Elizabeth and Martha, they have to take over running the entire household. The brothers, they're helping their father at the loom. And then you see Anne, just 11 years old, and she's stuck in this strange in-between space. Not really a child anymore, but definitely not yet an adult. Now, if you really want to understand their life, you have to understand the sound that defined it, that constant rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the family loom. It was their work, it was their survival, and in a lot of ways, it became the new heartbeat of their home. Can you just imagine that sound? From the second you wake up until you finally fall asleep. See, John Marshman was a really skilled weaver, and with England at war with France, the demand for cloth was incredibly high. So that relentless rhythm, it wasn't just noise, it was the sound of putting food on the table. So Anne had to learn a new job, and this shows you how she did it. First, she had to learn to card the raw wool. Then, her big sister Elizabeth taught her how to spin it into thread. But here's the thing, this wasn't just manual labor for her. We're told that the repetitive motion, the intense focus it took, it actually became a way for her to process her grief. It was like a form of meditation. And this quote from her father, wow, it just perfectly captures the emotional weight of her new job. He's connecting her work directly to her mother's memory, her mother's skill. And get this, her mother's maiden name was Angel. So Anne isn't just spinning thread here, she's trying to live up to a legacy. She's trying to connect with the mother she just lost. So you might be wondering, what about school? Well, for a weaver's daughter in 1795, formal schooling just wasn't in the cards. But Anne got an education all right, a very different kind of education, one that was all about the practical and sometimes desperate need to survive. I mean, just look at this contrast. On one side, under formal schooling, there's nothing. But on the other side, that was her classroom. Her curriculum was far more valuable for the world she lived in. She learned math by counting threads for the loom, science by reading the clouds to predict the weather, and economics by figuring out how to make one small pot of stew feed a family of 6. These were the lessons that were actually going to keep her alive. But of course, their lives weren't only confined to the cottage and the sound of the loom. The Marshman family was woven right into the fabric of their village, Hilperton, and their lives moved along with the rhythm of the seasons in their community. The Saturday market was their one big connection to the wider world. It was a place of business, for sure. That's where they sold their cloth. But it was also a place of life. It's where Anne could see the world buzzing, hear gossip about the war, and maybe, just maybe, if they were lucky, get a tiny treat like an apple. Just a little bit of sweetness in a really tough life. This timeline really shows how the year was structured by more than just grief and work. After that awful loss in March, spring brought the whole community together for things like sheep shearing. Summer had festivals with feasts and dancing. Autumn was about everyone working together for the harvest. Each season pulled the community closer, giving life a structure and keeping people from feeling isolated. And in the winter, when the family was all huddled around the fire, history came to life. Her father would tell stories about his youth, and her sister would share tales about their mother's family. For Anne, who had just lost such a huge piece of her own past, these stories were a lifeline. They connected her to the generations that came before her. So, after this whole year of hardship and loss and learning, who was Ann Marshman? Well, she certainly wasn't the same child who stood shivering in that churchyard back in March. She was being forged into someone entirely new. And this is the crucial point. Anne gained a kind of wisdom that was way beyond her years. This wasn't wisdom from books. It was wisdom from experience. It was the harsh, unforgettable knowledge of what things truly cost, both in terms of money and in terms of grief. And yet, and this is the part that really gets me, by the end of 1795, after everything she had been through, everything she had learned and endured, she was still just a girl, 11 years old. Her hands were calloused, her back was stronger, but she was still, at her core, a child. And that's the question her story really leaves us with, isn't it? It forces you to think about what childhood even is. When the world makes you grow up overnight, what part of you gets left behind? The story leaves us with this one last, beautiful, quiet image. It's Anne at the window, watching the first snow of winter cover the churchyard where her mother lies. And in that moment, she makes a silent promise, not just to remember her mother, but to carry her spirit, her name, Angel, forward with the life she lives. And so, Ann Marshman, 11 years old and now ancient, with a wisdom she never asked for, goes back to the rhythm of the loom. She picks up the shuttle and the thread. But now, she's not just helping with her father's work. Now, she is actively weaving her own story, her own strength, her own resilience into the very fabric of her village.